This is a continuation of the reading of the second Gorgias, which is again part of a collection of dialogues I have written as sequels to Plato's dialogues. In this section, we will cover Gorgias's argument that even if anything exists, nothing could be known, and Socrates' refutation of that point. This will cover Gorgias's argument that knowledge is impossible. Now, in a previous video, I described the significance of that argument by contextualizing it as having as its target the statement of Parmenides, which was that thought is thought of being, that it is the same to be thought and to be. This all hinges why Gorgias's argument has been misunderstood, and I have had to supplement an analogy and the context in order to make clear what Gorgias is, how his argument works. Because the argument at face value as preserved seems insufficient. But really does bear some weight and has to be taken seriously. The whole argument hinges on the object of thought, that there must be some object of thought in the way that there is an object of hearing, in the way that sound is the object of hearing, that hearing is hearing of sound, and that the visible is the object of sight, and that sight is sight of the visible, or color, perhaps. For Parmenides had claimed that it is the same to be thought and to be, that the object of thought is being per se, in an almost too simplistic sense. But Gorgias, by targeting that statement about the intelligibility of being, that statement of Parmenides, also poses a difficulty to Socrates' position, which is but a sort of nuanced or qualified version of what Parmenides had said in perhaps overly simplistic terms. But the whole argument rests on the object of thought. There must be something which thought is thought of, some genus, in the way that there is an object of hearing, that sound is the object of hearing, and that visible or color is the object of sight. So there must be something which is the object of thought. Parmenides had said that is just per se being. And Gorgias's argument is directed against that. Gorgias's argument is that if being were the object of thought, in the same way that sound is the object of hearing, then as all hearing is the hearing of sound, and nothing that is not sound can be heard, so also everything that is thought would be being, would be true, and nothing that is not being could be thought. There could be no falsehood in thought. Or again, as everything that is seen is color, or if you want just visible. Nothing that is not color or that is not visible can be seen. So also, if being is the object of thought, then everything that is thought would have to be, and nothing that is not being could be thought. That is what Gorgias is arguing. And I explained why that was significant in the previous video. However, I think that should be kept in mind. His argument should be kept in mind when reading this, because the dialogue sort of unfolds and doesn't necessarily come out and state the position, but that should be held in mind, what he's arguing for and why that is significant. So to begin, we ended the last reading, and this will be, I will just read through that portion of the argument. Starting from where we left off, where Socrates had refuted Gorgias's argument that nothing exists. Callias, you have very impressively resolved the current dilemma, Socrates. However, rather than pressing Gorgias on this point, why don't you advance to his second claim? For what is most daring about his thesis is that he goes on from his claim that nothing exists to claim also that even if anything exists, nothing could be known. And then, conceding the prior stage of the argument and taking that concession as a hypothesis, says also that even if anything exists and can be known, still even then it couldn't be said. Gorgias, you discern very clearly the unique nature of my argument, Callias. For even if I should make a concession that something exists, the thesis as a whole then takes that as a hypothesis and refutes the possibility that anything can be known or said. Nor do those who find shock that I argue that nothing exists comprehend the gravity of the whole argument, as the successive stages go even further when compounded sequentially. Socrates, and I count myself among those who find the first stage of the argument that nothing exists to be so shocking that I fail to comprehend the gravity of the subsequent stages that, using the concession of the first point as a hypothesis, then refute the possibility of knowledge and meaningful discourse. But neither am I able to recollect on my own the course of the second stage of the argument. So be kind enough to remind me how that part of the argument went. I am only able to recollect without being reminded that you said that even if anything exists, it couldn't be known. Remind me again how that is. Gorgias, if, as I said, anything can be known, all objects of thought would exist. If, as I said, anything can be known, all objects of thought would exist. And there could be no thought of non-being, nor any thought that is false. Socrates, forgive me if I require you to illustrate your meaning, for I could not follow this part of the argument when you were giving your exhibition. Gorgias, I have no qualms with clarifying my meaning. Socrates, as my intention is not merely to be contentious, but discovery, I will not strike down what appears at first sight to be a leap of faith. For someone might have contended with you that for there to be knowledge, it is not required that every thought is true and no thought false. I do, however, perhaps track your meaning. Is it this? You mean that if knowledge were natural to thought, then thought would be set over being in the same way that sight is set over what is visible. That if thought does not have being as its object, as sight has what is visible as its object, then there would be no hope for thought striking upon being and truth. And further, that thought would never permit non-being nor falsity if its object were being, in the same way that the object of vision is what is visible. Is that your meaning? Gorgias, precisely so. Socrates, the question then rests on the object of thought. Gorgias, on just that. Socrates, let us then further consider the point. There ought to be some object of thought, of which all thought is the thought of, as there is an object of sight, the visible, which all sight is sight of. Might we safely assume that much? Gorgias, there must be something of the sort. Socrates, the object of sight, we know, is what is visible, such that all vision is vision of what is visible, and nothing that isn't visible can be the object of sight. Might we also say that? Gorgias, yes. Socrates, and is not the object of hearing sound, to take another example, such that all hearing is the hearing of sound and only sound? Gorgias, it is. If anything is heard, it is sound. Socrates, sight, we said, cannot be the sight of anything that is not visible. Or if we were to specify, sight is the sight of color and of nothing else. Gorgias, nothing that is not visible, that is not color or perhaps surfaces, can be seen. But that is not a point I wish to dispute. Socrates, things, however, are composed of more than just colors, are they not? Gorgias, of course. Socrates, when we say that we see something, we really mean that we see the color of something, but not that we see what the color is the color of. When we say that we see something, we really mean that we see the color of something, but not that we see what the color is the color of. Gorgias, fair enough. Socrates, well, we said that sight is always and only the sight of color and nothing else, but that things are composed of much more than just color. Gorgias, we did. Socrates, then by vision, we see the color of them, but not what the color is the color of. Gorgias, not the thing which the color is the color of, not by vision at least. Socrates, and by hearing, we hear sound and only sound and nothing else. Gorgias, we agreed to that, yes. Socrates, but the sound of something is merely one aspect among others belonging to what it is the sound of. I mean to say that the thing a sound is the sound of is composed of much more than sound. But hearing only hears the sound it makes. Gorgias, yes, there is a great deal more to things than the sounds they make. Socrates, then by hearing, we hear the sound of something, but we don't hear the thing the sound is the sound of. Again, then by hearing, we hear the sound of something, but we don't hear the thing the sound is the sound of. Does that not follow? Gorgias, it does. Socrates, and sight cannot perceive sound, but only color, or what is visible. While on the other hand, hearing cannot hear color, but only sound. Gorgias, without question. Socrates, then sight cannot be that through which we apprehend that something the color of which we see and the sound of which we hear is the same thing? Gorgias, it cannot. Socrates, neither can hearing be that through which we discern that it is the same thing which the color we see is the color of, and the sound we hear is the sound of. Gorgias, neither could hearing tell us that. Socrates, neither we should say, could any of the senses, should we not? Gorgias, nor any other sense, nor the other senses. They each have their separate domain. Socrates, could then anything else besides thought apprehend that the thing whose color we see is the color of, and whose sound we hear is the sound of, is one and the same? Gorgias, no, that must be the function of thought. Socrates, and would we be right to say that the color of a thing is not the same thing as the thing itself, or the being of a thing, but is a sort of quality or attribute, as that is, the color of a thing may change, yet the thing itself remain? Gorgias, that would be right to say. Socrates, and the sound of something is not the same as the thing itself, and the sound of something is not the same as the thing itself? Gorgias, at any rate, the thing itself is more than just the sound it makes. Socrates, yet while sight sees the color of something, and only the color, but not the thing of which the color is the color of, and hearing hears the sound of something, but only the sound, and not what the sound is the sound of. Thought apprehends the thing itself, which eludes sight and hearing, of which the color seen is the color of, and the sound heard is the sound of. Gorgias, we are in agreement about that. Socrates, then would not thought, apprehending the thing itself, be receptive of being? Gorgias, thus far the argument seems to hold. Socrates, we are, I remind you, searching for the object of thought, looking for something equivalent to what color or visibility is to sight, and to what sound is to hearing. Gorgias, I recall. Socrates, and whether that is being or not. Gorgias, right. Socrates, we have, however, not to stop there before a complete judgment can be made. Gorgias, where does the argument lead? Socrates, well, thought does not stop at identifying as one and the same object, that whose color we see and whose sound we hear. Thought will not rest content with that. Perhaps this will indicate what thought is the thought of. We obviously, as agreed, don't think we know any object when we hear a sound, but have not ascertained what the sound is the sound of. We do not think we know any object when we hear a sound, but have not ascertained what the sound is the sound of. Nor when we see a color, but do not know what the color is the color of. Neither, however, do we think we know something when we know that a color we see and a sound we hear are the color and sound of the same thing. Thought rather hastens forth and asks what the thing is. My meaning is that knowledge does not consist of pointing to something there and uttering this, nor of apprehending that something we can point out is of a certain color, a certain magnitude, or has a certain attribute. Thought does not stop there, but has the natural inclination to demand an answer to the question, what the thing is. Gorgias, there is nothing disagreeable about that. Socrates, what that indicates to us is that our previous criteria for being is insufficient. but also that the object of thought is not met at that preliminary stage, and that thought nonetheless hastens towards being. Gorgias, I should agree. Socrates, now, we know something more so when we know what it is than when we know that it is of certain quality or of a certain magnitude or position or in a certain place. Isn't that so? Gorgias, certainly. Socrates, what, however, are we really asking for when we ask what something is? Gorgias, I follow not your meaning. Socrates, is not the question what something is only sufficiently answered with reference to a certain kind of thing? Or can there be a sufficient account of what something is without reference to the kind of thing it is? Gorgias, it seems to me that what something is should reference some kind of thing, yes. Socrates, otherwise the question what it is would not be settled and could still be asked. Gorgias, yes. Socrates, and when we know what something is with reference to the kind of thing it is, do we not then have knowledge of its essence? Or could the essence of something be anything other than what it is and the kind of thing it is? Gorgias, we would know its essence if we know we would know its essence if we knew what it is with reference to what kind of thing it is. Yes. Socrates, those are then the same. What a thing is, its essence, and the kind of thing it is. Gorgias, I cannot see any difference among them. Socrates, but whatever kind of thing we say anything is, includes others besides the particular thing in question, does it not? Gorgias, it does. Socrates, yet we could not know what something is without identifying what is common between itself and others of the same kind. For unless we know its kind, we don't know its essence, nor what it is. Yet the kind of thing it is includes a great many more besides itself. Gorgias, that is evident. Socrates, yet again, the kind of thing answers sufficiently to the question what it is. Gorgias, yes, we know what something is when we know what kind of thing it is. Socrates, then we need not be disturbed at finding that identifying what a particular thing is requires including others besides itself that fall under the same kind. For when we reach the kind, what that is will be a single thing in exclusion of all others, including nonetheless the particular instances of it. And moreover, answering what something is required a definable kind, which is what demands this maneuver. For if knowledge of what something is more so knowledge than knowledge that something is of a certain quality or quantity, then knowledge of what a particular thing is, by being defined according to a kind, will also be at the inclusion of other particulars. That is, since a particular thing cannot be defined at the exclusion of all others, as that would amount to merely pointing a finger at it and uttering this. Since a particular thing cannot be defined at the exclusion of all others, as that would amount to merely pointing a finger at it and uttering this. However, if we were to ask about a general term, like isosceles, democracy, or piety, our specifying its kind would not include anything else, and would without obscurity be in reference to a single thing at the exclusion of everything else. Our objective is this, if you recall. tracing out what thought is the thought of, and we do seem to be closing in on an answer. Gorgias, I am not disposed to contend with the point, Socrates, but I am indeed bewildered to permit that knowledge of what something is should be at the inclusion rather than the exclusion of others. Socrates, your bewilderment, I assure you, would be incommensurately greater if you were to attempt to discover knowledge of what something is, and I mean here a particular thing, without resorting to a kind. I am speaking of conventionalities in our haphazard descriptions of individual men like Callias as the son of Hipponicus or of the deme Alpinike, without reference to man and the definition of man or to their profession in general terms, nor to a particular chariot as the chariot of the great king, without reference to the kind of thing a chariot is. And here, Gorgias, that very perplexity overtakes me. For even when asking what this chariot is, carries with it the implication of the kind of thing that is a chariot. And if we were to wholly avoid kinds of things when answering what a thing is, we would be quite stripped of language and words. That is why I used as an example of trying to answer what something is without resorting to kinds of things, pointing with a finger and uttering this. As all else, I mean all words, aside from proper names, which I should say aren't even really terms and are only names and words in an improper sense, indicate kinds of things. Thus, answering what some particular chariot is without giving the kind of thing it is. Thus, answering what some particular chariot is without giving the kind of thing which a chariot is would amount to pointing and uttering this. And again, knowing what a particular chariot is implies and is derived from the knowledge of what a chariot in general is. As you observe the difficulty I find myself in at the attempt of trying to describe what the knowledge of what something is without resulting, as you observe the difficulty I find myself in at the attempt of trying to describe what the knowledge of what something is without resorting to kinds of things would entail. You might also observe the necessity of what I have said about reference to kinds when answering what something is, and the regularity, unskilled though it be in the speech of common folk, of the task. Gorgias. Then to bring you back to my own bewilderment of only being able to say what something is by including other things within the same kind or class, and the inability of saying what some individual thing is while excluding other individuals. Socrates, that only indicates to us, Gorgias, the direction which we should look for that which thought is thought of. That as sight is the sight of color or the visible, and only that and nothing else. And hearing is the hearing of sound and nothing else. So also thought is a thought of perhaps kinds or the definition of kinds or something in that direction away from particulars. Whether or not the activity of thought is therefore disposed to know, we have yet to decide. Gorgias, I think I perceive the course of the investigation and the direction you describe. Socrates, I might offer greater clarity thus. First of all, we agreed that we more so have knowledge of something when we know what it is than when we know that it is of a certain quality or quantity or in a certain place, did we not? Gorgias, we did. Socrates. And a sufficient response to the question what something is would result in a definition. Gorgias, it would likely take that form. Socrates. But a definition has to be the definition of a certain kind. Gorgias, of a certain kind. Socrates. Only then, when we have the kind of thing something is and the definition of the kind, will we know what it is. Only then, Gorgias, only then, Socrates. And we would then know its essence. Gorgias, yes. Socrates. And can what it is and its essence be any different than its being? Gorgias, presumably not, for the knowledge of the one has to be the knowledge of the other. Socrates, what thought is the thought of ought thus then to be characterized? Gorgias, if we are to be consistent. Socrates, but perception leads in the opposing direction and is rather twice removed from the primary objects of thought. Was that not what we previously said? Gorgias, towards particulars or away from what things themselves are? Socrates, in any case, none of the senses perceive what kind of thing anything is. For sight, we said doesn't see the thing the color is the color of, but only sees the color. And so could definitely not be said to see the kind of thing or what the thing is, of which the color seen is the color of. Nor could hearing hear what kind of thing anything is. That is, since hearing only hears the sound of something, but not that which the sound is the sound of, or in other words, cannot hear what makes the sound. Neither can hearing hear what kind of thing makes the sound. And this is evident, for perception is only of particulars, and not even of particular things themselves, but of some attribute of them. But we may be presented with the particular without knowing what kind of thing it is, or the universal class it falls under. Gorgias, yes, the contrast is clear. Socrates, perhaps I should illustrate the inclination of thought in the direction away from particulars. Gorgias, if you would. Socrates, does thought not proceed thus? When boys are learning their shapes and already know what a triangle is, but not what a right triangle is, or not what an isosceles triangle is, they first discern a similarity amongst some triangles, not as yet such as to discern what makes them similar, but only that they are all similar with each other in some way and dissimilar with other triangles. Then, from a multitude of similars, they discern that they all are the same in some respect, that they all have a right angle, if right triangles, or that they all have two sides equal, if isosceles, while differing in the relative magnitude of their sides and angular space otherwise. And from grouping together a multitude of similars and disregarding their dissimilarities and differences in all other respects besides what makes them similar, identify what is the same amongst them, and consider them all to be of the same class or kind, differing otherwise in the length of their sides, both relative to their other sides and to others of the same class, and in the angular space subtending their vertices, except for the one right angle they share if we are speaking about right triangles. Gorgias, that is indeed the way apprehension seems to develop. Socrates, sameness and difference, and similitude and dissimilitude appear as elemental concepts primary in the formation of any definitory kind. For only with the aid of those can we ascend from a multitude of similars and discern what is the same amongst them by which they are similar, and assign them a separate class. Gorgias, that is apparent. Socrates, whatever may be the object of thought, which all thought is the thought of, whatever may be the object of thought, which all thought is thought of, in the way that all hearing is the hearing of sound, these ideas, sameness, difference, similitude, and dissimilitude, are used in application in the formation of definitions according to kinds. Gorgias, those must be some sort of primary elements of thought. Socrates, yet they are not themselves the object of thought, are they? We seem to rather use them as measures of what really are the objects of thought when we compare and contrast things regarding whether they are the same or different and in what respect. Gorgias, no, as you say, they are more so what thought applies to what is primarily thought about. Socrates, consider again the example of hearing. We have repeatedly said that hearing is the hearing of sound, or in other words, that sound is the object of hearing. However, might we not advance a step further and affirm that high and low pitches, as well as loud and soft volumes, are the discerning principles of hearing, and that all sounds which are heard are interpreted according to them, to high and low pitch and loud and soft volume? Gorgias, those are indeed the distinctions with which we compare and contrast sounds we hear. Socrates, are those not congruent in hearing to sameness, difference, similitude, and dissimilitude in the domain of thought? Are those, that is, high and low pitch and loud and soft volume, not congruent in hearing to sameness, difference, similitude, and dissimilitude in the domain of thought? Gorgias, the two cases are congruent, yes. Socrates, then as high and low pitch and loud and soft volume are the measures or classes with which sounds are compared and contrasted and distinguished, let us consider what thought distinguishes with the measures or classes of sameness, difference, similitude, and dissimilitude. For that must be what thought is thought of, or the object of thought, as sound is what hearing is, as sound is what hearing is the hearing of. Gorgias, you mean to ask what thought determines to be the same, different, similar, and dissimilar? Socrates, yes. What is the equivalent of what sound is to hearing, which thinking is thought of, and which thought classes in terms of sameness and difference and the others? Gorgias, dare I say anything? Dare I say anything? For there seems not to be any particular kind of thing, as sound is to hearing, of which thought determines sameness and difference, likeness and unlikeness. Socrates, I am only so far along in the inquiry as the argument has hitherto advanced. In the case of hearing, high and low pitch and loud and soft volume can only be applied to sound and nothing else. Is that right? Gorgias, only to sound. Socrates, but sameness, difference, similitude, and dissimilitude, what could fail to admit of their application? Or What two things fall outside of those measures of being compared and contrasted thus, which would be irrelevant to sameness, difference, similitude, and dissimilitude? As for anything that is not sound, highness and lowness of pitch, and loud and soft volume are completely irrelevant. And for anything that is not visible, lightness and darkness are completely irrelevant. What accordingly is irrelevant to and falls outside the application of sameness and difference, unlike likeness and unlikeness? Gorgias, I can't think of anything that would fall outside of sameness and difference, likeness and unlikeness. Socrates, and before it was said that thought distinguishes kinds of things, and this through sameness, difference, likeness, and unlikeness, right? Gorgias, that was said. Socrates. And the question what something is answered with reference to the kind of thing it is and the definition of the kind of thing it is. Gorgias, yes. Socrates, and what something is, the kind of thing it is, and the definition of the kind of thing it is, are the same as its essence? Gorgias, the same. Socrates, then, is not the essence of things the object of thought, what thinking is the thought of? Gorgias, we might go so far as to say that, according to the argument. Socrates, the aim of our inquiry was to establish what thinking is the thought of, congruent to what sound is to hearing, which hearing is the hearing of. Gorgias, that was our aim. Socrates, then, according to the argument, as sound is to hearing, so essence is to thought, or as hearing is the hearing of sound, so also thinking is the thought of essence. Gorgias, that at least follows from what was said. Socrates, yet the essence, or what something is, cannot be different from its being, can it? Gorgias, no. Socrates, thought then is always the thought of being and the essence of things. Gorgias, perhaps Socrates, yet thought permits falsehood and often errs regarding the task you have described, which is again the reason for my argument that thought is not simply set over being in the way hearing is set over sound. For all hearing is hearing of sound, and what is not sound cannot be heard. While thought, on the other hand, is not always thought of what is, and is not always true, but thought admits of thinking what is not when a thought is false. Socrates, your argument was that if there were knowledge, thought would be thought of being. But if being were the object of thought, as sound is the object of hearing, then all thought would be knowledge, and thought would not permit of falsehood, and there could be no thought of what is not, as that is, there can be no hearing of anything that is not sound, and everything that is heard is sound. Is my interpretation of your argument accurate? Gorgias, that is a fair restating of my argument, yes. Socrates, since then there is falsity in thought, and we have thoughts, as you say, of what is not and does not exist. Thought as a whole cannot be of being in the same way that hearing as a whole is of sound and emits nothing else. Gorgias, that is exactly my point. Socrates, perhaps the analogy only goes so far. We were inquiring into the content of thought, thinking we were inquiring into the content of thought, considering what that might be, which thought is the thought of, as sound is the content of hearing, and color the content of sight. Were we not? Gorgias, we were. Socrates, and there must be something of this sort, which thought is the thought of, and there must be something of the sort, which thought is the thought of, as sound is what hearing is the hearing of. In that, I don't think we erred. Gorgias, neither do I. Socrates, our trouble is whether being is the content of thought, and how then there can be falsity if it is. Gorgias, precisely. Socrates, for we were saying, as hearing is the hearing of sound, and anything heard must be sound, and there can be no hearing of anything that is not sound. So also, if thought is of being, there couldn't be thought of what is not being. Gorgias, that is what we were saying. Socrates, let us then consider the limits of the analogy. Would you not say that hearing, sight, and the other senses passively receive their impressions? Gorgias, I would. Socrates, and that there is no process left over for them to actively perform upon their content, but hearing passively receives impressions of sound and sight, color? Gorgias, there is no active process for the senses to perform, no. Socrates, but thought, you would say, is an active process? Gorgias, I would. Socrates, and something results from the process of thought, something different from what it starts with? Gorgias, yes, I should also say that, as with all processes. Socrates, and is not an assertion or an affirmation or denial the outcome of the process of thought? Gorgias, yes, just that. Socrates, and when we say that something is what we affirm of it, or that something is not what we deny of it, are we not in a process of combining and separating concepts or terms? What I mean is this, that one concept is affirmed or denied of another, that one concept is affirmed or denied of another, when we say that something is something or other. But that if we held one isolated concept before our minds, there would be no affirmation or denial. Gorgias, that seems to be how the process functions. Socrates, and that is a process of combination and separation, affirming or denying one thing of another. Gorgias, apparently yes. Socrates, is this not then implied? Is this then not implied that things associate with and are attended by some things and are absent from and unconnected with others? Perhaps I should clarify my meaning. Gorgias, that seems to be implied, yet I wish you would clarify what you mean. Socrates, when we make the assertion that fire is hot, or when we make the assertion that snow is cold, we mean that where there is fire, there also is heat, and where there is snow, there also is coldness. And then when we say that heat is opposite of coldness, We mean that where there is coldness, there cannot be heat. And where there is heat, there cannot be coldness. And then combining the previous assertions, we say that where fire is, there cannot be cold. And where snow is, there cannot be heat. That is, a concept or an idea cannot be separated from some, but always attends upon them. And yet the same concept or idea cannot be connected with or present with others. Gorgias. There is nothing contentious about that. Socrates. And again, when we say that a triangle is a three-sided rectilinear figure, we are saying that the idea of triangle contains the ideas or concepts of three and rectilinear figure, and that the concepts or ideas are related thus. Or if either of the concepts three or rectilinear figure were taken away, would the concept of triangle remain? Gorgias. The concepts or ideas are thus related, as you say, as one contained in another, or perhaps as part to whole. Socrates. If we didn't want to think of them, whatever we should so choose to call them, ideas or concepts, as being contained one in another, or as having the relation to each other as part to whole, we might prefer to think of them as one of them being logically dependent on another, or one of them being logically prior to another. Gorgias. Whichever way we may prefer to speak of them, I follow your meaning that if the concept of three or the concept of rectilinear figure were taken away, the concept of triangle would not remain. Socrates. And when we assert that three is an odd number, when we assert that three is an odd number, are we saying that the concept or idea three contains the concepts odd and number? Gorgias. Yes. Socrates. And if oddness or number were taken away, three would no longer remain? Gorgias. That is right. Socrates. But the concept three refuses to admit the concept even. But the concept three refuses to admit the concept even. Gorgias. Refuses. Socrates. And the concept of even includes the concepts of divisible and equal halves. For what is even is divisible into equal halves. Gorgias, yes. Socrates. Then the concept of three, by refusing to admit of even, refuses also to admit of equal halves. Gorgias, that also. Socrates. Some concepts are then contained in others, or are associated or present with them and inseparable from them, and others are never present with them, nor connected to them. Gorgias, as you have shown. Socrates. And the outcome, we said, of the process of thought is an assertion, that is, an affirmation or denial. Gorgias. An assertion. Socrates. And an assertion is a combination of terms that affirms or denies one thing of another. Gorgias. Precisely that. Socrates. But the outcome of a process is not the same thing as the materials it starts with, is it? But the outcome of a process is not the same thing as the materials it starts with, is it? Gorgias. No. Socrates. And any process may be performed well or not well. Gorgias. That is right. Socrates. An affirmation or denial may then also be performed well or not well. Gorgias. Yes. Socrates. And when not performed well, it will be false, but when performed well, it will be true. Gorgias. Of course. Socrates. But the assertion will nonetheless be of the thing itself. But the assertion will nonetheless be of the thing itself when we affirm or deny that something is such and such. Gorgias. That is something of which I should like a further explanation. Socrates. Consider. If an assertion is made about a sphere, that a sphere is a body enclosed by a single surface equidistant from its center, is the assertion not about what a sphere is or what properties are inseparable from what a sphere is, stripped of whatever color or magnitude some particular sphere may happen to have, and whatever material some particular sphere may happen to have been made of? Gorgias. Presumably. Socrates. Where else could the essence of a sphere, or what makes a sphere, and without which a sphere would cease to be a sphere, where else could that lay bare and separate from the color, the magnitude, and material which particular spheres may happen to have, if not in the concept of sphere, which is thought? Gorgias. Nowhere else, if not there. Socrates. Doesn't our perception of some particular sphere include much else besides the essential nature of what a sphere is? Things that are accidental or incidental to the essence of a sphere. Things without which the essence of a sphere persists, but which a sphere may or may not incidentally have. Gorgias. Yes, the perception of a particular sphere includes much else besides the essence of sphere. Socrates. And perception does not separate and identify what a sphere is from the attributes which are not essential to a sphere, accidental things which a sphere may or may not have, such as a specific color, a specific size or material, but which, when taken away, the sphere still persists. Does it? Gorgias. It does not. Socrates. But thought attempts to determine what the thing is and uses a concept with which to signify the thing itself apart from those particular attributes which are not essential but are accidental to its nature. Gorgias. Thought does that. Socrates. And thought also makes assertions with the intention of stating what the essence of the thing is, or about which attributes are essential to it, which all such things of the sort must have. Gorgias. We often intend to say what the essence of something is with an assertion. Yes. Socrates. If an assertion may be made about what the essence of something is, and assertion is the activity of thought, would not thought also be about the essence or nature of the thing? Gorgias. That follows, at least for some thoughts. Socrates. At least for, you should say, the scope of thought. Gorgias. That would be well said. We have, I perceive, strayed somewhat from the position that thought is simply of being. Socrates. Well, thought, we said, is an activity which results in one thing being asserted of another, right? Gorgias. We said that. Socrates. And that consists in combining concepts into an affirmation or denial. Gorgias. Combining concepts, yes. Socrates. Then concepts are that from which the activity of thought results in an assertion, and that of what the essence of something is, or what properties are essential to it. Then concepts are that from which the activity of thought results in an assertion. The assertion being of what the essence of something is, or what properties are essential to something. Gorgias. Undoubtedly. Socrates. Are then concepts being most useful for asserting what the essences of things are, not tailored to essences of things? Gorgias. Perhaps, Socrates. However, all men of any learning would be quick to assert that concepts are not the same as things themselves. And they would readily continue to push you back, saying that thought is of concepts of things and not of things themselves. Socrates. And I would just as quickly admit that a concept, apart from the process of combination with other concepts into an affirmation or denial, does not immediately make plain the essence of what the concept is of. However, the distinction between concepts and the things themselves the concepts are concepts of may not be a hindrance to using concepts to reveal the essences of things. Gorgias. And how is that? Socrates. Concepts seem to be, if considered as a whole, perfectly suited to distinguish the essence of something from all else, and to display with precision what that is. Gorgias. Even while admittedly differing from what they are concepts of, I do think you are falling back into an impossible defense. Socrates. Observe. Nothing else is able to distinguish something as completely separate from everything else. What a concept or term grants to something is something with which it is completely distinguished from not just other things, but attributes and particular characteristics which are not included in its essence, but which happen to be present to some individual cases of it and not to others. Gorgias. The significance of that could be clarified. Socrates. The essence of something does not include particular attributes which are present only to some instances of that thing. The essence of a sphere, for example, does not include any quality, magnitude, or material of any particular sphere, but only what is common to all spheres and what makes a sphere to be a sphere, without which a sphere would cease to be a sphere. Gorgias. What significance has that to your point? Socrates. The concept of anything completely distinguishes it from not only all other things, but from characteristics and qualities which are not included in its essence, but which may be attributes of particular instances of it. Only a separate and unique term permits the essence of something to be considered and signified as separate from the qualities, magnitude, and all other attributes that are not included in its essence, but characterize some instances of it. Gorgias. Nobody would find that contentious. Socrates. Consider the difficulty we would have if we were to use pictures instead of concepts to signify things. If we were then to attempt to signify figure in general, we would have to resort to drawing some particular kind of figure, such as a triangle or square, and would include something which is not included in the bare essence of figure. Or if we were to attempt to signify animal in general, we would have to resort to depicting some species of animal and include more than is contained in the essence of animal. Difficulties would then arise in making the assertion that a triangle or a square is a figure, and that a man or a horse is an animal. Then, consider the piercing clarity of concepts like same and different and possible and actual and impossible, and how, being applicable to so many things, they remain distinct from them, and that their distinctness is comprehensible to us due to their having a concept or a term which is separate. That is to say that a concept separates something off as having a unique nature or essence. Gorgias. For the sake of things being referred to as separate, I observe the usefulness of concepts. Socrates. And do you observe that perception always includes more than is included in the essence of a thing, such as quality, magnitude, and material? Gorgias. Yes. Socrates. A concept, then, grants to the essence of something the ability to be isolated and conceived separately from the attributes which characterize particular instances of it, as well as from everything else, without which it might be confused with other things. Gorgias. That is plain. Socrates. Yet, an isolated concept only displays that it is some separate thing different from others without illustrating what its essence is. Gorgias. Undoubtedly. Socrates. Thus, the process of thought as the combining of concepts or terms into an assertion becomes most needed. Gorgias. How specifically so? Socrates. Well, the essences of things are not wholly separate, but as was said earlier, are some of them inseparable and some of them not associable, some of them present where the other is, and some of them necessarily not present where the other is. Gorgias, that was said. Socrates, and by combining concepts, we produce assertions, such as that by combining the concepts three, sides, rectilinear, and figure, we produce the assertion that a triangle is a three-sided rectilinear figure by combining those concepts. Thus, although the concept of triangle, when isolated, only signifies that there is some such separate and distinct thing, when combined with other terms in an assertion, is specified as to its nature. If, however, figure and three were not separate concepts differing from triangle, they would not be useful for clarifying what a triangle is. And if triangle were not a distinct and isolable concept from them and all others, the essence of triangle would be without a placeholder, with which its essence could be displayed and conceived as a separate thing. Gorgias, that is also clear. Socrates, thus we are in a position to make a statement regarding what thought is the thought of. Thought, we said, wants to know what the essences of things are. Gorgias, right. Socrates. We also said that thought makes assertions as to what the essences of things are. Gorgias, we also said that. Socrates. And by assertions, we meant the combination of concepts into a statement affirming or denying one thing of another. Gorgias, we meant that. Socrates, assertions would be the outcome and the product of the process of thought, while concepts themselves would be more properly what thought is of. Is that fair? For thought inquires about and makes assertions as to what the essences of things are. But thought does not receive passively the essences of things, not as a homogeneous and continuous stuff like sound or color. But there is some material of thought. But if there is some material of thought, such as sound and color are to hearing and seeing, then that material would be the concepts which are combined into assertions. Gorgias, that is perfectly fair. Socrates, but merely having the concept of something does not amount to knowledge. Gorgias, not at all. Socrates, concepts do, however, distinguish that something is some separate and isolable thing, which provide us with something to distinguish the essences of things from their accidental attributes, their qualities in magnitude and material. Gorgias, right. Socrates, having the concept of something is then, although not amounting to knowledge, akin to potentially and latently having knowledge. Might we say that? Gorgias, indeed. Socrates, and things are such that one thing is dependent upon others, as figure is to line, and never present with yet others, as number is to continuous. Gorgias, as was said before. Socrates, having the concept of figure, we would not yet have knowledge of what a figure is if we didn't combine the concept line and perhaps also surface and bounded by with that of figure into an assertion of what figure is. Would we? Gorgias, not as yet. Socrates, but the one concept is made clear through its stated relation to the others, especially those which it is inseparable from. Gorgias, quite so. Socrates, then if being is not some homogeneous stuff, but rather the essence of something is dependent upon and connected with something, some other things, without which it cannot be known, and never present with yet others. And so also are concepts related, such that one thing cannot be known without reference to others. But thought starts with isolated concepts. Then, if we say that thought is simply of concepts, thought will not be unmediatedly of being, at least not as some stuff, as we say, hearing is of sound and sight of color. However, thought as an active process will nonetheless be of things themselves as an active process, and will be of the being and essence of things as the outcome of the process of thought are assertions about things themselves and what is essential to them. Gorgias, I would be weary to contend. Socrates, there is no difficulty, however, in stating whether the process of thought, as any process or activity, may sometimes err and miss the mark. There is no difficulty, however, again, in stating whether the process of thought, as any process or activity, may sometimes err and miss the mark. Gorgias, the process of thought may miss its mark and err. Socrates, and may also strike upon knowledge, or every process has some natural end, and without that would fail even to be a process, especially one which is integral to a faculty of ours like thought. Gorgias, the possibility of attaining knowledge should be thereby assured. Socrates, then, whether we say that as hearing is of sound, so also thought is of concepts or something like that. Thought as an activity or process will be about things themselves and will nevertheless possibly err and strike falsehood. Gorgias, that much has been said. Socrates, but it will not be as you said, that if there is knowledge, everything conceived must exist, and never could falsehood be thought. Gorgias, I suppose not. Socrates, that is, since thought does not receive being or essences of things passively, in the way hearing receives sound and sight receives color, but starting from isolated concepts which do not amount to knowledge themselves, actively seeks which other concepts are essentially connected with some one concept. Thought then does not have as unmediated, but as partial, the essence of things by having their isolated concepts. And we should not say that thought is of being as hearing is of sound, but that thought does have a great affinity towards being and essence, and as a process tends towards that end. Gorgias, fair enough. Socrates, and thought, having such a capacity, must not be incapable of knowledge. Gorgias, not as things stand. Socrates, neither, Gorgias, does thought admit of non-being in the unqualified sense. Gorgias, yet falsity is thought of what is not. Socrates, what is more so non-being? That which is impossible, or that which is possible, but not actual, yet may or may not have been actual before, or may not at some later time become actual. Gorgias, that which is impossible is more so non-being. Socrates, and is not that which is contradictory impossible in the absolute sense? Gorgias, most impossible, yes. Socrates, if then thought admits of non-being, if then thought admits of non-being, and there can be thought of non-being in the unqualified sense, there ought also to be thought of what is contradictory, ought there not? Gorgias, there ought to be. Socrates, could, however, anyone possibly conceive in thought a rectilinear circle or a curvilinear square? Could, however, anyone even possibly conceive in thought a rectilinear circle or a curvilinear square? Gorgias, not that. Socrates, why? Why? A rectilinear circle would cease to be a circle, wouldn't it? And a curvilinear square would no longer be a square at all. Would not the conception of a circle as rectilinear rather fail to conceive of a circle than to be logically contradictory? And wouldn't any thought of a square as curvilinear fail even to think of a square rather than to think of what is logically contradictory? Gorgias, the thought would altogether fail to grasp the concept in either case. Socrates, And if someone were to voice the proposition that a circle is rectilinear, or if someone were to voice the proposition that a square is curvilinear, they would not even be speaking of a circle or a square, respectively. What would be using the word not with reference to the concept circle or square, but to something else entirely. Gorgias. What they would call a circle in name would by no means be a circle, but they would have to have in their mind something else entirely, and likewise in the other case. Socrates. And so thought is altogether repulsed by what is contradictory and refuses to admit anything of the sort. There may perchance appear a contradiction in name when someone voices such an opinion, but for the reason that what they mean to signify by the name is not the contradictory of what they affirm of it, or they fail to conceive of what they speak about. Gorgias. Contradiction is indeed an anathema to thought. Socrates. Now, although we have established that there is such a thing as falsehood in thought, and so in a qualified sense, there can be thought of what is not, we find that thought does not admit of non-being in any unqualified sense, but cannot think of what is impossible and contradictory. Gorgias. That is evident. Socrates. And if thought were to conceive of non-being itself, would that not rather be thought of nothing? Gorgias. Of nothing. Socrates. Ought we not rather to say that such a one not even be thinking? Ought we not rather to say that such a one would not even be thinking? For thinking of nothing would amount to not thinking at all. Gorgias. We ought rather to say that. Socrates. Then there can be no thought of non-being, neither of non-being per se, nor of what is impossible and contradictory. We can, however, think of things as they are not, and so think what is not when what we think is false. Gorgias. In that last sense only does non-being enter into our minds. Socrates. We are contented to affirm that there can be knowledge, and that thought is disposed to tend towards the being of things, and being repulsed by non-being, refuses to allow any thought of what is impossible and contradictory. Gorgias. Given what was said, we are in agreement about that. Callias. And here, Callias. However, again, Gorgias's argument is such that even if he is willing to make a concession here, Callias. However, again, Gorgias's argument is such that even if he is willing to make a concession here and admit that there can be knowledge, using that as a hypothesis, his argument then contends that even if something exists, and even if anything can be known, whatever that is couldn't be said or communicated to another. Gorgias. Callias here is right to remind us of that. For as I said, even if anything can be known, it couldn't be said or communicated to another. I'll stop there.